Welcome back to the McCoy Leadership Podcast, elevating your impact through valuable insights and conversations about leadership. Welcome back to the McCoy Leadership Podcast, and today we have Larry Onan with us. Larry is a graduate of the University of Colorado, and Larry has had all kinds of experiences in management, leadership, and still today, in nonprofit world as well. And still today, he continues to speak in the United States and abroad about lifestyle, stewardship, and fund development practices. Larry, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to spend with our listeners. It's a pleasure to have you here. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are?
Well, Amos, I didn't get here by mistake, but I was surprised. Let's put it that way. I think a lot of us off. I have a couple of grandsons that are in college now, and they see their end product. They think they see true north right now. And 20 and 22 years of age, they're just looking and saying, that's what I'm going to do. But my life was that way too. I thought I was going to be into theater arts. I was going to be in New York or Hollywood. I loved directing. I'd spent 5 years of my life developing that. And then I found myself in a crisis situation at the University of Colorado, and that changed my trajectory. And then over the years, in what I've done is probably about every 4 to 5, 6 years, I get a left turn that I was not expecting that took me someplace else. So I'm not one that was educated in leadership. I came into it by the time I graduated, I was a theater arts speech coach, English teacher, secondary education for the state of Colorado, which I never did, but that's what the School of Education at the university thought I was going to do. So I didn't come into this with, I'm an MBA in management and I want to do leadership. I came into it with a passion to just help students get squared away and get a right focus in life and have an internal picture on things. And I really left the University of Colorado, ended up University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, doing the same thing, but I was enjoying that. But then sometimes you are surprised by an assignment that takes you back into where you really are using your strengths. And that's really what happened to me. And that's how I got into leadership in the first place was, hey, Larry, we've got a music group coming to the area. We need them to be scheduled. We've got 5 weeks of their time. Schedule them as best you can. That was the entire assignment. And I started figuring out how am I going to use a group that we're paying for and get them onto all the campuses in the 5-state area, Philadelphia, New York, D.C., Pennsylvania, all across it. And there were schools all over the place there, higher education. So I had 3 months to book the group, and I booked them 30 times in 30 days. And I about killed them as a result because I didn't know they needed a break. But I started using leadership skills to take the initiative to get that done. And so I had them at all the major Ivy Leagues. I had them at colleges. I had them in private colleges across. And I was initiating and planning that 1 week, that 1 month. And I started realizing I really enjoy this more than I do the other stuff that I enjoy doing. And it pulled me into leadership. I came to it probably kicking and screaming because I thought, oh, I want to do this for the rest of my life. And then pretty soon I thought, yeah, maybe there's some things here. And I learned as I went. So many people never knew they were going to be in leadership, but they ended up in leadership by default or by circumstances. And they start questioning, how in the world do I navigate this once I know I'm there? And so I had to navigate myself through a lot of things, and I learned by hard knocks. And one thing I really learned big time, I had a mentor a long time ago when I was challenged with another big project, and he said, Larry, go for it. You've always got the freedom to fail. And I'd always seen failure as something you never wanted to get close to, but he saw it as the opportunity to think big. And if you don't hit your target and you're thinking bright, failure is only 15 or 20% against what you wanted to happen. And so you can always pick up the pieces, try it again, tweak some things, and do it over. So I was motivated by much of my life as I always had the freedom to fail, and it was not a negative, it was a positive. And it gave me a chance to try things again and again and tweak things and adjust things. And doing that, I was seeing a lot of success. But I didn't realize I wasn't after success. I was after being a good leader and a team person to make things happen. Naturally, I wanted things to come out right, but my motivation was not how much money we make or how big it was. It was, are we doing it correctly so that it comes out right? And so I got into it by hip pocket. I did not get them because I had an education in leadership or management or business. And yet I've stuck with it for over 60 years now.
So as John Maxwell's book says, sometimes you win, sometimes you learn. I think that is so true in general. And you also mentioned, those left-hand turns. You're going down and all of a sudden there's a left-hand turn. And for anybody that has traveled or lives in the New Jersey area, you'll know how strange that is, because you can't make left-hand turns out there. But anyhow, I often tell people when I'm working with them that, I want you to picture your life right now, everything that you have going on. And, you kind of get an idea. And then I tell them that over the next 90 days, something that you didn't expect will happen. That could be good, bad, indifferent. But something you didn't expect will happen in the next 90 days. And I believe you have to look at those things as opportunities. I'm curious, those left-hand turns, how did you handle them? Were they opportunities or were they roadblocks?
Well, many times the turn that you're not expecting is not because of what you did. It's a circumstance outside of you. And I knew where I was going. I thought I had it figured out. I was into theater, then I went into a ministry type environment, and then that ministry environment wanted me to utilize skills that I had. And I was actually going back to directing a stage routine almost, because a director of a stage show takes a book that's got words, and in a matter of 6 or 8 weeks creates a final production that thousands of people come to see. So there is a lot of elements about bringing all those pieces together that I never really distinctly thought about when I was in theater arts. But I started seeing how it worked. But what would often happen to me is I was down a path. I had a vision for something. I got really into putting music groups together. And I loved doing that. I spent 5 years of my life doing that. I had 10 groups performing, one in Asia, one in Europe. They weren't my groups, but I was the one that was facilitating them and making them happen. And I was very involved in the creative design of what those were. And I thought I could spend the rest of my life career just putting groups together and producing albums and producing schedules and all the stuff that goes on with the performing arts. And then I learned in the middle of a very large conference that somebody else was taking over my job. And it was announced as a good news, and all I heard was, I've lost my job. That was a turn that I was not expecting. And, I went probably 90 days, Amos, before I really knew what was going to happen next. That doesn't mean I was sitting around doing nothing, but I was trying to figure out what comes after this unexpected turn. And that led me into fund development as a career and as a consultant and so forth. But I had no idea I would be doing that. I had no aspirations to become a mentor, a coach, a consultant. That wasn't my dream. But I learned by doing and by building a team of people that we could accomplish a lot together. But those were the surprises. And I would say in my career, I probably had 5 or 6 times in my life where it was a total change in direction that I was not expecting. Probably my most recent one, and maybe there's smaller ones in between, but 10 years ago, my wife contracted a glioblastoma brain tumor. Well, you find that out, you don't even know what a glioblastoma tumor is, so you got to go Google it. You're afraid to go Google any place because you don't know what you can trust out there in cyberspace. But one thing I did when I looked at 2 websites, Johns Hopkins University and the Mayo Clinic, is they both started off the introduction of this terminal disease is treated in the following way. Well, that wasn't a business change. That was a radical change in a 40-year marriage. In fact, 45 by the time she passed away. But what I realized there is I had another opportunity to put my faith into action and deal with another change that I really was not expecting. And I had to adjust to that post her death, because I had to say, I'm still living and she's still gone. So now what do I do? So there is always adjustments. Leaders have got to realize that flexibility is going to be the number one rule of the day, because something's going to happen today that you didn't expect, and it's going to mess up your day. And it's going to mess up probably your life if you're not very careful. And the consequences that we take as a result of our actions live with us for a long period of time. So, yeah, I got into it, and yes, that happened often, but it happened with a embracing that here is a new opportunity, rather than, oh dear, what was me? I'm undone, I can't take it. Now, it doesn't mean you go through grieving. It doesn't mean you go through self-evaluation. It doesn't mean you don't get emotionally upset with the decisions that were made far beyond you. Those are things that's just emotional life that comes to you. But how do you live through that, and how do you maximize that becomes the other part of the question. So I've learned to live with that. You know, when I started off, I had an assignment with 28 boxes of pledge cards that were 90 days old, that nobody had even opened since the night the pledges were made. About $2 million made from students. There was about 80,000 students in a large arena, Dallas, Texas, the Cotton Bowl. And the pledges were made and put in 28 boxes and shipped to California. That was the end of the pledge. Nobody had touched them in 90 days. You don't follow up a pledge that's 90 days old, and you don't even have any idea what's in those boxes. I had another guy working with me that had the skill and the ability to deal with technology, and I was the writer. I could create, I could do those other things. So we became a team, and that team ended up creating, over a period of 12 years, we went from 2 people to 7 departments, 125 people working in that area. But that was really nothing. I didn't sit down and think, I'm going to create this. I had to deal with the realities of what was today. What in the world do I do with 28 boxes of pledge cards? And then we started figuring out what to do. And I think sometimes you got to figure it out on the fly, and hopefully you've got the background to help you figure it out on the fly, because there was no rule book. And I think sometimes people think the management book, I've got great friends in marketing and the backgrounds in business, and they tell me a lot of times it is on the fly, not in the textbook.
Absolutely.
Because the textbook may give you some frame of reference to do it right, but it's not going to tell you the plan to get there. It's just going to give you insights to what you do next.
So
go ahead.
No, as I say, speaking of textbooks, or instruction manuals, you wrote a book, Intentional Living and Giving, and the book emphasizes aligning your resources, or the resources that you're managing, with God's plan, and starting to be a good steward. I'm curious, from the end of, even in those early days when maybe you had people on a team, or you had a music group that you were that you were trying to kill by giving them 30 performances in 30 days. And I'm a musician, and so that one resonated with me. But how did you start to formulate that idea of what it is to be intentionally living and managing, the gifts and the talents that are at your fingertips?
Well, I think what happened to me, Amos, is I didn't know anything about stewardship at the time. I understood it from a biblical side. I thought my dad was a itinerant preacher and a church planter, so he would talk about stewardship every once in a while. But stewardship always for a preacher was, we got to get the money in the door to fund this operation. So it became a, quote, tithing. They would 10%. That's what the word means. So I always thought that when I heard the word stewardship, it meant, well, that's the money for the church. That's money for operations. And I've run into many, many pastors that hate talking about stewardship because they think they got to talk about money. Stewardship really has very little to do about money. It has everything to do about being entrusted with the responsibility to do something for somebody else. Stewardship is managing somebody else's affairs. That's all it is. So if you run into a good accountant, he's a good steward of somebody else's money. He's managing it. He counts it. He correctly does it. That's what a steward is. And even in the history of the word steward, the steward was the one that was managing a landlord's property. And he was in charge of the HR. He was in charge of the money. He was in charge of the maintenance. He didn't own it, but he was managing the affairs of somebody else. Well, I didn't know that I hadn't thought through it that way. What I had got into, Amos, was classical fundraising. And fundraising in its purity is exchanging. I give you something, you give me something. So what can we exchange? So if you participate in a golf tournament, you're giving $500 to play golf or whatever they're asking, and you play golf, hopefully play with good people so that you enjoy it. And you're doing it for the interest in golf. You're not doing it for the mission that asks you to play. But the exchange is, I get something out of it. I get to play golf. And my father-in-law a lot of years ago loved playing golf, but he really liked big tournaments because he played with the Seahawk football team. So he liked being picked up with the luminaries of the Seahawks. And then he got to play with the quarterback or the line, all the people that would be there. So his exchange was not so much about the charity, but the opportunity to play with these people. That happens in nonprofits today. If you're watching almost anything out there, you're going to see appeals for, say, animal shelters. And they're going to give you really soft appeals, and your heart's going to hurt for these animals and all this kind of stuff. They know how to manipulate the audience to think a certain way. But what they're going to do is, for your gift, they're going to give you a T-shirt to wear. So you're going to feel emotionally good, and then you're going to have a T-shirt to wear as a result of it. Now, they tell you it's so that you can identify with it, but what you're really wanting is a T-shirt, more so than just the generosity of giving a gift to the animal shelter. That would happen with children's hospitals. You send money in for a children's hospital that's doing a good job, you're going to get a blanket, or you're going to get something back. That is classical fundraising. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just a very difficult way to raise funding. And I was into that for the first 3 or 4 years of my career into fund development. I was learning the techniques of how I could get people to make the exchange. And then I was assigned by default a task that I did not even understand what it was. I was brought into a meeting because of my success with my team guys that were working with me. They asked me to attend a meeting where they were talking about raising significant funding for the mission that I was working with. And that led to a discussion from the consultants that said, if you do not teach a biblical point of view of stewardship, you're not going to be able to raise the money because you're going to create competition with the marketplace. But if you teach stewardship, you're going to open up great generosity for everybody to get more. Well, the organization was not prepared to start something new and teach something differently, but the consultants wouldn't let up. They said, if you don't do this, you're not going to achieve your goal and your objective. And I think it was probably Floyd off subject, but somebody in the room, and I was sitting there totally silent, just listening. And somebody said, well, Larry's had some pretty good experience in the last few years. Let's assign that task and figure out what stewardship means to Larry. Oh, that's a great idea. He can have that assignment. And I wrote down, what does biblical lifestyle stewardship really mean? That was on my yellow pad of paper. And at the bottom of the page, Amos, I wrote, and you've got the freedom to fail. I had no clue what I was going to do with that statement. The reason I think it was a ploy is nobody ever, after that meeting, followed me up on what I was going to be doing. There was never an assignment of, okay, Larry, what are you going to do? How are you going to go about this? It just didn't happen. And about 6 or 8 weeks later, because I have a high degree of responsibility in my strengths, it was bothering me that I wasn't doing anything with the assignment. So I brought my team leaders together and I said, guys, maybe if we figure this out, we can be more successful in what we do. But we need to figure out what this means, because I think there's maybe something here that they are onto as consultants and we need to figure out. And that became the essence of what is in intentional living and giving. And this is going back into the mid to late 70s. And it revolutionized everything we did because we chose never to be fundraisers. We wanted to be fund developers. We chose never to call our department the fundraising department. We called it the World Involvement Ministry. We chose never to call people donors. We started calling them financial partners because partners do that. They join hands together.
Yep.
And they do things together, and they are equals in the mission. I think many nonprofits out there think that if I can just get money from this people and go do my thing, I've achieved my goal. But boy, you haven't achieved anything because a partner walks with you through the entire process. They're as interested in the outcome as you might be creating the mission to accomplish something. So partnerships are very, very critical to this whole story. And what I did in the Intentional Living and Giving, Amos, is I outlined the core principles that we developed and taught for years. It made a transformational change in our personal lives. All of us that were involved in that team started thinking, we are stewards of something that we do not own. And it's our job to reflect the owner. In this case, it's God. God is the owner of it all. And King David in the Old Testament, one of his great prayers is he is acknowledging you are the owner of everything. Everything in heaven and earth is yours, and you are the righteous owner of it. And we adore you for being in control of everything, and we want to serve you and do what we need to do. So even David in the Old Testament was recognizing the authority of an outside person that was leading them. So it became an issue of, okay, if that's who we are and we are working for somebody else, what does that somebody else think about? Well, he was a giver. Every place you see in Scripture, God is a giver over and over again. So God wants us to be givers. God wants us to ask because he has designed us in a way where we need to ask others. So it's not just in prayer, which I believe in strongly, but it's also me asking you, Amos, because if I don't ask you, you don't have the opportunity to respond. So I've got a responsibility to ask you to be involved in something I'm doing, because that may be something that is on your heart. Now, I need to be prudent and saying, what is your interest anyway? Would this be something that might be if you ask me to give to a certain kind of causes, it means, and I don't like those causes, it means you didn't do your homework. That's all that means. Because you could ask me for things that I really do not believe in. But if you do it correctly, you're going to be asking me to participate in what I already believe in.
Yep.
And then the principle behind all of that is the law of the harvest. It takes a while to make things happen. I think there's a lot of Christian leaders, even business leaders, want things to happen far sooner than it's going to happen. And it takes time and process for anything to happen. And of course, the good news is there's an abundant supply for you to keep on giving if you've tapped into the right sources of recognizing these other truths. So a steward is one that is assigned the responsibility of managing somebody else's affairs. And that could be your skills, it could be your time, it could be money. When I wrote the book, there's a whole chapter on money because out of 16 or 18 chapters, I'm expecting that you probably are wondering where the money fits in. It does fit in, but it's one of 100 things you can get. It's not the only thing. And stewardship of money is just one of those many, many, many things. And if a person catches that, realizing who is with strengths, who they are, and how they've been uniquely made, we're fearfully and wonderfully made, the Old Testament says. And if we're fearfully and wonderfully made, you got to figure out who you are. So it's very important to not just wander through life. You've got to dig in and live off your strengths, not work off of your weaknesses. And I think many people don't know who they are. So they're just wandering aimlessly. It's like a bumper car at a carnival. You just keep hitting people. Well, I don't like bumper cars. They jar my neck, and you don't ever know where north is. So, we don't need to live that way. That's not a requirement, but you've got to figure out who you really are. So from a leadership, I'm really strong in saying you've got to figure out who you are so you can lead others with that strength.
Yes. And I'm kind of curious, thinking through this, and anything that is different. So if someone read this book and they started to apply the principles that are there, what are some of the most common challenges that you see people coming up against that maybe are roadblocks for them, or stumbling blocks maybe would be a better description? Where do you see the most challenges when people are trying to apply this?
I think some people try to apply principles by, for instance, take the subject of money. They get into money management type courses to learn how the techniques work. Well, the techniques will get you so far, and there's great stuff out there that helps people. Peace University with Dave Ramsey is excellent. Crown Ministries, Compass Ministries, there's other organizations that are some great gurus that teach about that. But what they're teaching you in many cases is techniques to manage something. They're not necessarily focusing on the self-motivation that says, I choose to do it this way because I'm a steward. And rather than just the technique of how to manage your money a little bit better. Now, I've taught courses. I've probably taught 25, 30 courses in managing resources. My wife and I did that together for years. But the bottom line is, if you don't have a change of attitude at the start, it's a spiritual decision. Really, it's got to be made someplace. If you're not recognizing that you're working for somebody else and not yourself, then you're going to be struggling with it, and you're going to be looking for techniques all the time. And techniques are good. They can help you do things, but you will not stick with the technique long term if you don't realize that technique is helping you accomplish a greater purpose. So I think many people are confused. They try to take the techniques of something like the book and say, okay, I'm going to apply it. That I don't own it, but who does own it? If they don't know, if they're not connected to the owner, then they're probably wasting their time in the technique. But I'll help them a little in that regard. What I did with the book to help people is I wrote the first part of the book is on the principles behind lifestyle stewardship. There's about 9 chapters that even dig into that deeper. And the latter half of the book is now what I called in the book an authorized wealth distributor, because you're authorized to give away God's wealth and resources to meet the needs of other people. It's God to people and people to people. But the latter half of the book is not about principles now. It's about how I live this life effectively. So I give them a job description. I write on money. I write on deception, because many people are deceived by wrong theology and getting into self-preservation, thinking that God is going to be, he's going to change his mind because of the way I pray or things I do. No, we got to make sure that we're not being deceived. Deception is not a radical shift into a cult. Deception is about 5 degrees off of truth.
Yep.
Maybe 10 degrees. About 15 degrees, you're really getting into trouble. And probably at 15 degrees off of truth, the average person can say there's something wrong here. This thing stinks. But at 5 or 10 degrees, you don't know if you're looking at truth or not. And there's a lot of people teaching untruth out there. If you look at the New Testament, in fact, the New Testament, every book in the New Testament deals with deception and conflict except one book. And it's the book of Jude. That's a little teeny book in the back of the Bible. It's one of the letters that was written. That's the only book that writes, and it's only a chapter or two. It's the only book that does not deal with deception. We are open for deception. We seem to fall for deception. We like the outcome of deception might bring us, and it's self-centeredness in many respects, and so we get caught up in that. And I don't want people to get caught up. I wanted to be good stewards, not to be deceived by some shyster out there just trying to get their attention, and probably get their money and probably get other things from them as well. So yeah, it's a learning process, and you learn all the time, every day.
So where can people find your book, and where can people find out more about you to get in contact with you?
Well, you can get hold with me. I do have a website. It's called larryonan.com. And while my name's got an apostrophe in it, on the website, you can't put the apostrophe in because the the electronics and the technology does not like characters and alphabets mixed together. But just LarryOnan.com. And, I do blog over there. I have podcasts that I put over there. You can get the book there if you want it that way. Most people would prefer to go to a Barnes & Noble or Books A Million or Amazon. Any place that books are sold, you can get a hold of the book. Intentional living. The word intentional is important because life has got to be intentional or you're going to miss it.
Yep.
So living and giving is a part of what you do, but the intentionality is where it all starts. And if we're looking at leadership to say, I'm going to be intentional in leading a team, I'm going to be intentional in making the good decisions. I'm making choices not to be fat, which means I'm going to get rid of things that make me fat. That's intentionality. So whether it's your weight or it's food or it's leading people, Amos, what I did when I was leading people a lot is I wanted them to thrive, and I managed by wandering around, but I had to manage intentionally that way. So I had an office, and I could bring people into the office, but every day I wanted to spend 30 to 40 minutes wandering around, getting in their space and hearing what they're dealing with, because the management by wandering around is where relationships and better understood what they really were doing. They could come to my office and fake me out.
Yep.
But when I was dealing with them in their culture, I would do that. And then I think another thing I always realized that life is not lived at Disneyland. Walt Disney created a place that was absolutely perfect. That's why they do all of the tree trimming and all of the planting at night when nobody's there. And there's never a droopy bush. There's never anything out of place at Disneyland. Life is not lived at Disneyland. That's a visit for a few hours. And I want people to realize that you're going to have hard knocks. You're going to have upsets. You're going to have things you don't like. You're going to have contrary leaders that you've got to deal with. The response of the steward, even to his leadership, is important. The leader is not going to get the maximum out of his people unless he is leading correctly or she's leading correctly. And I'm always saying, look out for the curves, because most accidents on the road are because some people got their eyes off of the road.
Yep, absolutely.
They were either on their cell phone, they were doing something else, and maybe it was a curve that literally took them off the highway. Maybe it was running into somebody because you weren't alert to what was around you in your circumstances. So be alert to those curves and those things that can definitely upset your plans. And those things are many times external, not internal. Now, there's a few things that we probably bring on our problem. You got into that, and that's affecting you in a different way. But be looking for those particular opportunities. Be aware of your circumstances. And, I've learned to lead people by giving them ownership. I enjoyed, frankly, standing in the back of the room watching an event take place that I never got close to the platform. But we orchestrated the plan to where it worked well. And it was a presentation, everything. When everything was working well, I was satisfied to stand in the back and say that is the way it should have worked, because everybody was taking ownership on their part of what they do. And when I wrote the book, I'm the author of the book, but I'm not the creator of the content. That was a team effort that had about 6 or 8 of my team involved in that we worked on that together, and it transformed everything we did. I was just glad to see it transform. We raised significantly more money over the years because we did it right, but we were doing it because now we were stewards. We were not just trying to raise money, and money came as a result of it. So I said, those kind of things, that's the way I live my life today. Intentionality, Amos, is I get up every morning saying, what am I going to do today to help somebody else pick up on these concepts? How can I help somebody else thrive rather than just survive?
Absolutely. Well, Larry, we end every episode with a kind of a couple of rapid fire questions. And the first question is if we could magically get all of the school administrators from across the United States into one room, and you just had a second to give them one item that maybe they could include into a student's career or into the curriculum that might help to turn out better, well-rounded, ready for life graduates, what would be that one thing?
I think of a quote of an old gentleman in England years ago. His name was Wells, and he came to the United States, and my friend was my coach. I wanted to spend time with this guy because I wanted to get his world wisdom of 45 years of doing this in England, fund development at that particular time. And it's not about fund development. He went to this guy and he said, what is the gem that you could give to me that would change everybody at what I do? And he looked at him and he said in his British clipped words, the giver needs to give far more than any cause needs to receive a gift. Now, where's the bathroom? And he says, I knew at that moment I got the wisdom, but the giver needs to give far more than any cause needs to receive a gift. We are meant to be givers of our time, our influence, our money, our expertise. And I think if we looked at our lives and says, I need to do this because I was wired to do this. I've been wired by my creator to be a giver. And I need to give more than any cause needs to receive a gift. How can I get involved and make the difference? Because I've been created and wired that way. And if a person starts to comprehend the implications of that, it would make a big, big difference in your daily life. You're no longer wandering around aimlessly. You're aiming for what God's led you to be your true north.
I like it. The second question is, what has over your career been your go-to book? Maybe a book that you keep on the shelf and continually go back to.
Oh, the book. Well, probably I love the Bible the most because it's so full of wisdom. I don't look at it as a historical record of something. I look at it as I'm the owner of everything is speaking to me there. So I need to go back to that. And then there's, that's 66 books, all combined for 1,600 years. So it's not one book,
yes,
but it's full of wisdom. Book of Proverbs. You'll get the richest man that probably ever lived, King Solomon. And all he did was give pithy one-liners all the way through. And I try to pick up a pithy one-liner almost every day. And how can I apply that to my life? So, yes, it may be in a response of, that old book. No, that's not an old book. That is some of the greatest wisdom you can ever pick up.
Wonderful. And the last question is, today with all the technology and apps and everything that's out there, what is the most useful piece of technology that you use?
I'm learning. Well, first of all, my computer has become a real godsend to me. I'm 81 years of age, and so I'm not like my 14-year-old granddaughter that can fix anything. So I rely on that. But the technology that I think could maybe be one of our greatest assets, and it could also be one of our greatest liabilities, is what AI can bring to the table. I think that there is tremendous potential there for seeing much more to happen, right? Don't get technology as a end-all. It's simply a tool, an assistant to help us be more effective. And we've got to be very careful that we don't misuse something like that. But frankly, I'm very impressed with what potentially could come from the whole technology of AI. And I am not the best at it, but I'm saying, my goodness, this is quite amazing. So I embrace it, but I embrace it cautiously.
Yes. Well, thank you for all of your insights and your wisdom. We've had a lot of fun having you on here today. Hopefully, maybe we can get you on again in the future. But thank you for taking time out of your day to spend with us.
Well, thank you very much. It's been fun to be with you today, Amos.
And for our listeners, if you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to check out our past episodes. And don't forget to give us 5 stars on whatever platform you're listening on. And you also then get alerts on each episode that comes out. Until next time, we appreciate all of you.